Alrighty. Jacqueline, you can hear me on your side?
Yes, I can. Good morning, Vaughan.
Wonderful. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another Labor Law Chambers webinar. Gosh, I can't believe this is the end of July. I think Jacqueline, yourself, and our audience would probably agree that this year is just running like a freight train. But yeah, another month where we could give back, just like President Madiba did, and while reflecting back on our rather young but progressive this constitution. So look, today's topic might sound academic, but Jacqueline, when we were going through our preparations, there are such key risks and key items that I think are going to be very, very important to owners and HR managers for them to take back to their risk committees and to have a look at whether they are managing their risks properly. And I'm especially excited about all the case law that you're going to be sharing with us today. Those are always key highlights for me. But for our audience, if you haven't, please head over to our YouTube channel and subscribe. I think it's very important. Every time after this podcast, we get quite a lot of comments on whether we're going to post it and whether we're going to post it. And if you subscribe to our YouTube channel, you will immediately get notified of new content. And you also see that we've got new podcasts and webinars that we've recently posted and uploaded. But as always, I have Jacqueline Azel with me. Jacqueline manages our labor law consulting division and also fittingly so completed her master's degree focusing on human rights and constitutional law. So good morning, Jacqueline. And once again, thank you for all your preparations and contributions in these sessions.
Thank you very much, Vaughan, and welcome everybody. Thank you for taking the time to share this special hour with us. Yes, I am personally very passionate about our constitution, and we just thought this is the month where we can then look back and see what has happened in the last 30 years, but also to make it practical for you to share your time with us, to pull that back and see what does that mean for the workplace and for us where we are every day. Are we aligned? Are we not aligned? Are there some pitfalls? And like Vaughan said, we also record the session. It's posted on the YouTube channel. And when I mention other topics, I will also just alert you to say there's actually already a webinar on this topic. So if you want to know more just about this, then please go there and see what is available. So when I thought about this presentation, like Vaughan said, our constitution is very young, but one of the most advanced constitutions in the world. And I thought, what makes it so strong? And if I think about strength, is there a shape that I can attach to strength? And this is then what I thought about. When I thought about it and I took a look, if we go back as far as the pyramids, we look at triangles, the Eiffel Tower full of triangles, that very well-known structure in front of the Louvre. So then I thought, can I identify a triangle in the Constitution? It might sound a bit abstract, but I'm sure that that will now speak for itself. And this is just my own interpretation in the sense of how I place these three key words or phrases. I specifically put equality and human dignity on the bottom end and freedom at the top. And my thought process was, if I see you as my equal, I will treat you with dignity, and then ultimately we should be able to live freely and express ourselves and live the way that we ultimately want to live. And let's go see where we find these items in the Constitution, because this is not my own brainwave. I got this from the Constitution, so let's see. Section 7.1 in Chapter 2 specifically speaks about equality, human dignity, and freedom. So those are our core democratic values as a South African society. And everything that we discuss today will come from the Human Rights Charter, which is Chapter 2. And then I think if one only takes one sentence or phrase with you today, I think it should be Section 9.2. It declares that everyone is equal in the eyes of the law and that everyone has the right to enjoy equality and freedom. But with all things in life, there needs to be a bit of balance. So this shouldn't be like cold water that I'm throwing out over this wonderful discussion this morning, but part of the law is to say there's always a balance, right? There's always a balance. It is important to know that no right is absolute. And to just make a very simple example, I might live in a property, it's my little space, I have the right to have my friends over and have a party, but no, I cannot have a party 24 hours a day at 200 decibels so that my neighbor cannot also enjoy their freedom on their property. So we need to live while striking a balance between these different rights. And throughout our discussion today, this will be a key theme coming through. Let's see. The last little bit of attention that I want to give specifically to human dignity and equality, again, just to highlight, it took me back to what George Orwell's book said in Animal Farm. All animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. That is not what we want for our Constitution. That is not what the aim is when we look at values like equality and human dignity. And I just want to share that little sentence right at the bottom. The majority of human rights litigation centers around equality before the law because equality ensures and includes the full enjoyment of all rights and freedoms. And that is for everybody, not just for some a bit more than for others. It's for everybody to enjoy. In the Human Rights Charter, which is in Chapter 2, we get what we refer to in the law as the listed grounds. The listed grounds is like the heartbeat of what we are entitled to and how we can expect to live in South Africa. And I'm going to take us through this list. I did pair them. Some of them are paired together on a slide because they're like family. They're not exactly the same, but they are family. And then I'm going to show you either with legislation or with a recent case, what has developed and what has happened in the workplace with each one of these items. With some of them, we have more examples and more case law, and others a bit less. But because of time, I'm just going to share, I think, the most pertinent examples. All right. If we look at what happened in terms of race and color in the last 30 years, very prominent, I'm sure you're all familiar with the Employment Equity Act. That is a key piece of legislation aimed at correcting wrongdoings of the past. So people in vulnerable groups did not have the same access to employment. So the focus of the Employment Equity Act is then to rectify that. So this is also a very good example of where Section 36, our limitation clause, comes in. Because if I apply for a job, I'm 50, I'm white, and there's another suitably qualified individual from a previously disadvantaged group, the law says the employer can discriminate against me. That discrimination will be fair because we need to rectify this imbalance. So yes, my right to employment might be infringed, but it's for a fair reason. So this is a very good example of where my right might be a little bit infringed, but there's a fair reason to it because it's to rectify something else. The other case that I want to highlight is Solidarity on behalf of Oosthuizen against the South African Police Service. In this instance, it's an example of where African officers made false racial accusations against their white superior, and they also harassed the superior, the white individual. And in this instance, the SAPS didn't do anything to manage the harassment and to deal with the fact that the allegations was unfair. And the police service was actually held responsible for the suffering of this senior individual. So sometimes false accusations of harassment are being made, and it's important to note that that is equally serious as when there's a true instance of harassment or victimization or discrimination based on race or any of our listed grounds for that matter. Right. Another interesting example where race and pay came under scrutiny was in the passenger rail agency case. A black employee referred an equal pay dispute and said, but these two white males, they earn more money. And now it's also interesting to note that we've got different levels in our courts. First, this case went to the Labour Court, and the Labour Court found in favor of the black employee and said, yes, sir, you were the victim of apartheid discrimination. The matter then progressed to the Labour Appeal Court, which is more senior, and the Labour Appeal Court then unpacked the test to determine if pay disparity constitutes unfair discrimination or not. And in this case, the prohibited ground was race. So what this means is I can, for example, say, Vaughan, you're paying me less because I am younger, or you are paying me less because I'm a female, or you're paying me more because of one of these listed grounds. However, in this case, the court found that the work that was done by the black individual and the work that was done by the white individuals were not the same. The work didn't entitle or bring about the same pay. So you have to look at, is the work of equal value, is the work the same? So in this instance, the fact that the white individuals were paid more had nothing to do with their race, but the complexity of the job. But that's a whole test on its own. We also have, just to keep this in the back of your mind, the Fair Pay Bill coming. It's not promulgated yet, but that will also be an important piece of legislation to take note of once it is promulgated. All right, let's see what happened in terms of gender and sexual orientation. I must say, when you go onto online job application platforms, there are still quite a few of these drop-down menus where an applicant has to choose whether they identify as male or female. Those are the only options. The more progressive companies have got an option that says other, and maybe even an option that says choose to not to disclose. So I think in the recruitment arena, there are quite a few companies that should go and look at what does our online application platforms look like, and what are the options that we offer people to choose from in terms of how they prefer to identify or not to disclose. Another very interesting topic for me is dress code. A lot of companies still have a male dress code and a female dress code. And that is something that should now become gender neutral. It doesn't matter who's wearing the dress, as long as the dress is suitable for the office. It doesn't matter who's wearing the tie. Like, I'm wearing my tie today, but there aren't any offensive slogans on my tie. So it doesn't matter whether I choose to dress more masculine or more feminine. We need to assess whether the clothing item is suitable for a professional environment. So that might be something that you want to go and take a look at and see what does our dress code say, right? Then, for example, gender neutral bathrooms. Now, I know some offices or companies might rent office space and they can't just build another bathroom if they want. But one of our clients had a very clever idea. On each floor of the building, there's the traditional male bathroom, the female bathroom, and then a bathroom for people with disabilities or making use of a wheelchair. And they changed all the wheelchair bathrooms to the sign that they put on the door was all-inclusive. So now on each floor, they've got an all-inclusive bathroom plus the traditional options that's always been there. That is also something that one can look at. And the other interesting thing that one could explore, extending benefits like medical aid to same-sex partners. These are just a few ideas of things that you might want to look into and see where are we in terms of our own policies at work. A case law example, the Dutch Reformed Church, Moreletta Park congregation, had a homosexual contract employee, and all the indications were there that this contract would definitely be renewed. And then the church, and the word cure is from the actual case, it's not my word. The church tried to cure this individual, and when they see that they cannot cure this individual, they did not again renew the contract. And this individual was successful with his court case. The church had to pay him damages for impairment, dignity, and psychological suffering, loss of earnings, and also both, he's probably an attorney and an advocate, but legal costs for 2 counsels and an unconditional apology. So discrimination based on sexual orientation is not something that the court will condone in our society. Hey, let's see. Quite a lot happened in terms of marital status, family responsibility, and gender. I've got quite a lot of information to share with you. However, just remember, although the content on the slide, there's quite a lot of information, you will be able to go back to the YouTube channel and maybe read a bit more of this. I don't have time to read everything for you, and I think also it will be very boring if I just read it to you. But the content will be there for you to go and spend a bit more time on. Although the Woolworths versus Whitehead case is quite an old case, it's from the year 2000. Mrs. Whitehead applied for a job at Woolworths. She was pregnant at the time. She was unsuccessful. Woolworths appointed another candidate, and Mrs. Whitehead then challenged this and said, listen, but you discriminated against me because I was pregnant at the time. And the court found it wasn't the case. The applicant that was appointed was actually a lot better qualified for the job than Mrs. Whitehead. But what I thought was very important to highlight here, and it's in at the bottom in red, the Labour Court noted that the interruption of a pregnancy is not sufficient to disqualify an applicant. This type of disruption is something that can be overcome. So what that means is a business might feel operationally, we can't afford to appoint someone now, and then they're gone for 4 months, and then we need to put someone in their place, and then only they come back. The court says that disruption would not be a sufficient reason not to appoint a pregnant individual. So that's something to just maybe keep in mind. This is again very recent. So Mrs. Whitehead's case is from 2000, and then last year, 2025, just a short little snippet. I can't say in any specific culture, but there's a tendency when females get married to a male, then they often take their husband's surname. So in this Jordan matter, the males went to the Constitutional Court, said, but why can't we take our wife's surname? So then the Constitutional Court said that it is discrimination, and the Parliament has to now amend the Births and Deaths Registration Act, so that, for example, Vaughan, if you want to, you can now take Lelani's surname. And if my husband wants to, he can take my surname. But yeah, this is just something more recent, maybe not that impactful to society, but just to show that there are so many different things when we start looking at the Human Rights Charter and society and how we live and how we choose to identify and associate and so forth. This one is very interesting and important. I think if there's one thing for you to check maybe after today's presentation is go and take a look at what your maternity clause or policy says in your workplace, because the Van Wyk ruling from last year changed this landscape significantly. I'm not going to delve into the detail, just overarching. Previously, according to the basic conditions of employment, a female employee could take up to 4 months unpaid maternity leave, and the secondary parent could take 10 days unpaid parental leave. So now the Van Wyk ruling said the two parents, the birthing parent and the secondary parent, can now combined take 4 months and 10 days. And these two people can decide amongst themselves how they want to take the go and take a look. The court gave Parliament 36 months as of October last year to amend the unemployment insurance legislation. And we expect quite a bit of changes to come there, because I'm working for one company, my partner's working for another company, and these two companies will have to find out but who's taking how much leave, so that both don't end up taking 4 months. So there's a couple of administrative things that is not in place yet. However, the right for these two parents to take this combined amount of leave is with immediate effect. So please do go and take a look. Reach out to us if you need assistance to amend your maternity, now paternity, family responsibility leave situation. Just please reach out to us, because we can assist you with this. It is important. It's with immediate effect. The administrative things from the Department of Labour will still fall into place. Age. I found two really nice examples with case law. This is also a fairly recent case. We see it's 2021, so it's not that old. The military skills development system says we are only going to develop individuals if you are not older than 26 years. And then there's this organization, Thobela. They work to help individuals from previously disadvantaged communities to access further education. And Thobela then said, but this is unlawful. You can't just say that only people up to 26 can be part of this military skills development system. But the court then found, when we look at the military and when we look at how and for what purpose these individuals are being developed, there's a very good reason why age is, in this instance, not an unfair form of discrimination. Right. So the Supreme Court of Appeal held that the age requirement forming part of the MSDS has a rational basis that serves the functional requirements of the Defence Force, so that the Defence Force can carry out its constitutional mandate to defend and protect the country. Right. So in this instance, age was a fair discrimination factor. If we then look at Swart versus Mr. Video, this is just a CCMA case, but still it did make a turn in the court. In this case, I don't think we still get video shops, come to think of it. But yes, Mr. Video advertised a job and said, listen, we want someone not older than 25 to come and work for us. And then the applicant applied, and Mr. Video said, listen, this salary is too low for someone who's 28 years old, and you're not going to like to report to maybe someone who's 24. However, in this case, the commissioner found there was unfair discrimination based on age. The employee can decide for herself if she wants to work for a particular salary and take instruction from a younger individual. So sometimes the inherent requirement of the job would mean that you need to be younger for a very specific reason. And in other instances, there is no fair reason to say that you need to be either younger or older. Right. So there's still hope for the older ones of us. Okay, disability. Mr. Darmons was an active firefighter, got injured at work. And just on that side note, when an employee gets injured at work or during the course of their work, there's a much bigger onus on the employer to try and accommodate and support that individual. And this is exactly what the City of Cape Town did. They really had a very lengthy disability process, made an effort to accommodate this individual in an administrative role. But as an active firefighter, this employee was on a particular career development promotional track. And now that this individual was in an administrative role, City of Cape Town said, you are not eligible anymore to be on this career promotional track. And then the employee challenged this. However, the Labour Court determined that there was no discrimination based on disability. The employee cannot meet the inherent physical requirements of the level or position that they applied for. So in this instance, inherent requirements of the job were a complete defense against the allegation of discrimination based on disability. Please always remember that everything is very much case by case. The circumstances of each case needs to be assessed very carefully. We can't just apply one test or one outcome of a court case to every other situation. While we are speaking about disability, what I do want to mention is, this is again maybe a bit more academic in nature, but it is very important because we see more of these aspects emerging. Remember when we looked at the slide with all the listed grounds, there is also provision for arbitrary grounds. So arbitrary grounds is a ground where I can say, this is also something that if you discriminate against me because of this something, my dignity is also going to be impaired. What we've seen in the disability environment or topic is people living with neurodiversity. In very severe cases of neurodiversity, with assessments from psychologists, psychiatrists, and occupational therapies, neurodiversity in serious or yes, I can say serious instances can also be classified as a disability. And then there needs to be reasonable accommodation for those individuals. We see quite a bit more individuals feeling comfortable to disclose that they are living with neurodiversity. And then, like I say, in severe instances, it can be qualified as a disability. And then reasonable accommodation is definitely required from the employer in these instances. Religion. Religion is also always a sensitive topic. I think most of the topics we discussed this morning can be very sensitive. This individual applied for a job at Sun International. It's hospitality, hotel, and it was a management role. And at the time of the interview, the individual did not disclose that he is a member of the Seventh Adventist Church. That's a tongue twister. So everything went fine. The individual started the job as the group sales manager, division hospitality. And then something came up where the individual had to work on a Saturday. There was a tourism in Durban on the Saturday in Durban, and the individual said, sorry, but I cannot go and work. And for quite a while, the employer really tried to accommodate the employee. But eventually, one can see the person commenced employment in March 2016. And then in July 2016, the employer held an incapacity inquiry because the employer was of the view that the employee was unable to perform the duties. The employer also offered an alternative position that would not impact the employee's Sabbath, but the remuneration would then be reduced by almost 45%, which is really a lot. So the employee declined the alternative, and in September of 2016, employment was terminated. This employee then approached the court to say discrimination based on my religion. The Labour Court found that the employer did everything possible to accommodate the employee, taking into consideration the inherent requirements of his role and the impact it had on other colleagues when they had to now try and fulfill his duties. So this is, again, a very good example of, yes, you've got the right to your religion, but these are the requirements of the job. Also important to note in this case, the court specifically said the employer did everything possible to accommodate the employee. So it's not a matter of when the tourist in Durban came up, the first instance that the person couldn't work on the Saturday, in the next 3 days, they rushed into an incapacity hearing. They first tried to accommodate, they looked at alternatives, and when they exhausted all the reasonable alternatives, then only was the employment terminated. It is also important to note that reasonableness is a theme that will always run as a golden thread through law, no matter in which area of the law you look at it. So in cases like this, the employer is not required to go and create an alternative. We can explore what we have, and if there isn't a reasonable alternative available, the employer doesn't have to create a specific position to accommodate someone. I grouped together language, ethnicity, culture, and race because this is a little bit of a culmination. Vaughan, I don't know if you maybe have a question somewhere. You're welcome to interrupt at any point.
Yeah,
I'm like on a roll here.
we just try to give you some space just to gather your thoughts, and something that's just been very apparent to me. You know, if we speak about Section 23 of the Constitution, it speaks about every person has the right to fair labor practices. And, you know, if I look at all these cases, I don't think, and it's probably improbable, that the employers acted like they did because they wanted to cause harm. But it's that thing that you're talking about now. It's that reasonableness, and it's having a sound liaison, or somebody to speak to give you advice, because often you find yourself in these situations. And again, it's just so interesting just to see how these cases go through the process and are obviously found unfair, and how important it is just to look at that reasonableness and fairness, and to have somebody that you can consult with and obviously get proper advice. So, and the other thing that was also very interesting is just I've been making notes as we're going here in terms of all the various aspects of HR that this topic touches on today. And it is incredibly wide. It touches on recruitment, pay, pay disparities, essentially. You've spoken so much about discrimination. So it's such a foundational piece of legislation for us, right?
Absolutely, yes. And then also when we discuss this next slide, also it's important to note that we've got a new code. If I say new, I actually think it's 18 March 2022. The new code on victimization, bullying, and harassment in the workplace. And this new code repealed the previous codes that just dealt with sexual harassment. So it's also important to make sure, do you have an harassment policy? It's a legal requirement. Whereas a leave policy is a nice to have, your dress code policy is a nice to have, whereas this code places a duty on the employer in terms of harassment. So we've also presented a full hour webinar just on that code. It is on the YouTube channel. That's another thing that maybe you can just go and check in your workplace. What have we done to maybe create awareness around that as well? So,
and I think if we speak about our progressive constitution, I think what's so important to our audience today is to make sure that you keep on top of this. A progressive constitution and legislation comes with a lot of change. And gosh, we've seen that since, I think my first exposure to big changes was back in 2013, I think it was, when we had that big overhaul of the Labor Relations Act. And I mean, if we could see recently just how many new pieces of legislation and updates there's been, which is extremely cumbersome. I understand that our audience here today is inundated with so many things. But gosh, if you're not keeping up to date with this, it's just going to catch up with you. But that in itself is a good thing. We can see that things are improving for the better. If we look at the Swart case, I mean, if we can reflect back now on the Swart case, we're thinking, but what were these people thinking? 20 years later, we can understand that is, there's better ways to deal with that. So, interesting.
I had another thought, but it went. Oh, okay. What I also wanted to say is, when you say cumbersome, the thought also came to me, especially now with this, the Van Wyk case with the parental leave.
Yeah.
The employer has to implement certain things immediately, but Department of Labor has 36 months to make a couple of changes, and we expect like the UI-19 form that the person needs to take to the doctor might look a little bit different. So it's difficult for employers to navigate. Okay, so do we now reach out to the partner's employer on our own?
Yeah.
Do we create an agreement on our own at the moment? So that's why we are here, to help you navigate, especially where you have to implement immediately, but some of the legislative things are still very much in the air.
And I think our instinct, our instinctive response the moment with the new parental leave was, but how are we going to manage this? Just practically, how does this work? And I think we always speak of change management in the HR department. How important that is to do it properly. That was probably a good example of how it really worked out very badly, because your poor employees were exposed to this new piece of legislation, and then your HR departments were absolutely inundated with questions that they didn't have answers for. And just how important it is to, whenever you change something, to do it systematically and to follow a proper process. But yeah, thanks. I just wanted to share some of my thoughts.
Yes, thank you for that, Vaughan. And on that, we sit in processes often where employees are very much informed about their rights. But like you said, Vaughan, Section 23 says fair labor practices for all, which means at least the employer also has a little bit of fairness coming their way from time to time. But the nature of employment law is designed to protect the individual who is in the position of less power, which is the employee. So one can understand why the legislation is drafted in the way it is. If we come back to language, ethnicity, culture, and race, Ms. Parihachi was the only employee of Indian descent. She was teaching at this African school for 10 years. There were never any challenges, but then she got a new head of department, and this head of department started targeting her. Despite lodging a grievance, nothing happened. She approached the CCMA and then the Labor Court, and she said, I'm being discriminated against. I'm being harassed because of my race, my ethnicity, my culture, my language. And although the Department of Education promised to investigate, nothing meaningful happened. Her formal grievance remained unresolved for a shocking 2 years. So the harassment continued, and Ms. Parihachi suffered emotional, psychological, and physical harm. And the court awarded her 50,000 Rand damages and ruled that the school must resolve the grievance within 60 days. It's just sad that somebody had to suffer so much before someone tells the department, you now have to deal with this. So the crux of the matter is making assumptions about an employee's abilities or suitability based on race, ethnicity, or language is unlawful. It undermines the values of equality and dignity. And employers must investigate discrimination or harassment complaints swiftly and, where necessary, take disciplinary action. So if you haven't maybe refreshed in a while on harassment, or maybe it's news to you that there's a new code on this topic, you are more than welcome. The webinar's there. Go and look at the presentation, and it will definitely give you enough steer to know what you should possibly implement or revise in your workplace. HIV status. This case was also one of the first cases that came out shortly after the Constitution, the year 2000. Mr. Hoffman applied for a position to work as the cabin crew internationally on SAA. He went through the pre-employment medical, and that also had an HIV test. He tested positive, and then they said, you're not suitable for the job. And SAA's defense was that to travel into Africa, you need the yellow fever vaccination. It's a requirement, and HIV positive individuals can have a negative reaction on this, and then possibly also spread the yellow fever. So that was their defense. Mr. Hoffman challenged this in the Constitutional Court, and the court found that people living with HIV can very well treat and manage the condition. Yes, if you're in end stage AIDS, yes, the yellow fever vaccination would not be ideal for you. But at the point where Mr. Hoffman was managing his health, taking his medication, living a normal life, there was nothing that he could not do that any other individual could do as an employee of the SAA. And the court said denying Mr. Hoffman employment only on the ground that he tested positive for HIV was unlawful, and SAA had to extend an offer of employment to him and pay legal fees, again, of to counsel. Because normally, just for interest sake, when people approach the Constitutional Court or maybe the High Court or the Labour Appeal Court, you would typically not just have an attorney with the right of appearance. You'll probably also appoint an advocate. And then that ball starts running. So Mr. Hoffman was successful, and then he was able to proceed with his career. Social origin, sure, I struggled to find a clear example of this. So this is like the one I could find. And it's as simple as there was a merger, and during the merger, it was found that the nurses in Northwest were paid a lot less than the nurses in Pretoria area. And it's basically just because of the geographical area. And the Labour Court ruled that the employer did not have a justifiable reason to discriminate against the nurses from the historically disadvantaged institution based on social origin. The employer had to retrospectively correct the salaries and had to align it with the higher salaries. So again, this touches on the pay situation as well. Make sure that if people do the same work, they get paid the same money. Or if the work is of equal value, pay them the same money. So if it's a national company and you've got an office in Northwest, you've got an office in KZN, you've got an office in Cape Town, you can't say, listen, I'm going to pay the people in Northwest less because property is more affordable there. And I'm going to pay the Cape Town people more because their living expenses are higher. It's about the work. The work and the pay goes hand in hand. Not the color of the person, and not the location of the person, and not the language or the religion of the person, right? Where I do have a nice example for you where location can justify a higher pay, and the only place I've come across it was in the diplomatic services. So when South Africa places a diplomat in Paris, they get paid X. But if they place a diplomat in Iraq, they get what we call a hardship post, and they get paid more because of the location, because of the living conditions. That is the only instance where I've come across more pay for a person for a post because of the location. And in the diplomatic services, these remote or less friendly areas, the posting is really referred to as a hardship post. It's also difficult for that diplomat to relocate with their whole family to some of these areas. And that's why there's more pay attached to that post. All right. It is important to just note that you cannot just scream discrimination at the top of your voice whenever you are unhappy about something. We do see this happening. So what I normally say to an audience is harassment, victimization, bullying. There's usually a repeat pattern. So sometimes poor treatment is unlawful and it's wrong, but it's not quite harassment or victimization or bullying yet. So that is just a technical legal differentiation, but it is important to make sure that you obtain the right advice. So, for example, Acting Judge Kroon explains that discrimination is a special kind of offense. There's certain characteristics for something to be discrimination. But it's not to say that because something is not quite meeting the definition of discrimination or of bullying or of harassment, that you cannot flag it. You need not keep silent. It might just be a different type of offense, but it's not to say that there isn't any recourse for you. So this was a mouthful. I think the court cases in the last 30 years shows us that there has been progress. Is there more to be done? In my view, absolutely. But I think each of these cases is like a little mirror. We can look in that mirror and say, what does our bathrooms look like? What does our benefits look like? What does our dress code say? What does our pay structure look like? I think, like Vaughan said, there's quite a few things that we can go and check to make sure that our own houses are in order, so to speak. And that's it from me, Vaughan.
Very important just to be sharp with that as well. But Jacqueline, thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much for today's session. I think if you and I had our way, we would have wanted to do this on Mandela Day. Yes. But I think today was excellent, and it was a fantastic way to just wrap up July and to head off in the second half of the year. To our audience, as always, thank you very much for your support. We'll continue doing this as long as you guys get value from it, and give us a few days, probably a week, up until a point where we'll upload our content onto YouTube, and then we'll see each other probably for a few more sessions before the end of the year.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Jacqueline, keep well. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.